My wife blocked my whole family from meeting our newborn, while her relatives showed up daily. Her own sister later exposed the real reason. Our daughter was born 3 weeks ago, and my wife Lauren has refused to allow anyone from my side of the family to see her. Not my parents who live 20 minutes away, not my sister who flew in from across the country, not even my grandmother who is 92 and may not have many chances left. Lauren's family has been here every single day. Her mother basically lives in our nursery. Her father has taken 500 photos. Her siblings walk in and out like they own the place. But when my mother calls asking when she can meet her first grandchild, Lauren starts crying about boundaries and safety and needing space. The excuses keep shifting. First, it was about germs and the baby's immune system, even though her family came straight from jobs at a daycare, a hospital, and a gym. Then it became about overstimulating the baby, yet her family threw a party in our living room when the baby was 5 days old with 15 people. Then it turned into establishing routines, but her mother rearranges our entire schedule whenever she visits. My mother offered to wear a mask, wash her hands, stay outside, and look through the window, anything just to see the baby once. Lauren said that was creepy and obsessive. When my mom sent a gift, Lauren returned it, saying we didn't have room for more stuff, while her mother had filled the nursery with things we didn't need or want. I tried talking to Lauren about fairness, and she said life wasn't fair, and I needed to respect her as a mother. She said she'd gone through labor, so she got to make the rules about who saw the baby. When I pointed out I was the father, she said I didn't understand the bond between a mother and child, and I was being controlling. Her mother backed her up, saying new mothers needed support, not arguments, looking at me like I was some kind of abuser for wanting my family to meet my daughter. My sister had planned her entire visit around meeting the baby. She'd taken time off work, bought a plane ticket, booked a hotel to not impose on us. Lauren knew this for months. When my sister arrived, Lauren suddenly developed anxiety about visitors, and said she couldn't handle anyone outside her immediate support system, which apparently only included her blood relatives. My sister sat in her hotel room for 4 days, waiting for permission to meet her niece before flying home, heartbroken. Lauren posted on social media about how hard motherhood was, while her friends commented that she was doing amazing. My father-in-law shared pictures of himself holding the baby with captions about being the proudest grandpa on the planet. When my dad replied, asking when he could finally meet her, Lauren erased his comment and blocked him. She told me he was acting hostile and trampling boundaries on her page. Things hit a breaking point when my grandmother called from the hospital. She'd taken a fall and was being admitted for surgery. She asked if she could see a picture of the baby before going in, just in case. Lauren overheard the call and started yelling that I was emotionally manipulating her by bringing up my grandmother's condition. She snatched my phone and told my grandmother she was toxic for guilt-tripping a new mom, then hung up. My grandmother was completely confused and thought she'd done something awful. That was when Lauren's sister, Rachel, pulled me aside. She'd watched everything happen and couldn't stay silent anymore. She told me the real reason Lauren was shutting my family out. Before we married, Lauren had been engaged to someone else named Michael. His mother had been deeply involved in wedding plans, and Lauren hated every second of it. When they split, Lauren swore she'd never allow another mother-in-law anywhere near any kids she had. She'd been planning this since she got pregnant, telling her family she would assert control early and make sure my mother knew her place, which was nowhere near the baby. Rachel said Lauren had an entire plan about making my family beg and humiliate themselves, then still refusing just to crush them. She wanted them to stop trying so she'd never have to deal with them. Rachel showed me texts where Lauren bragged about making my sister waste money on a pointless trip, saying it would teach her not to assume she had any right to the baby. Rachel also showed me Lauren's group chat with her friends, where she was joking about my grandmother being in the hospital, calling her dramatic and saying old people always used health scares for attention. She even wrote that she hoped my grandmother would die before the baby was old enough to remember, so she wouldn't have to deal with visits. I confronted Lauren with the messages, and she tried to grab Rachel's phone to delete them. Rachel had already sent everything to me. Lauren screamed that Rachel was jealous and a traitor to their sister bond. She said I was picking my family over her and the baby. I said I was choosing to stop her from abusing my family. I took the baby to meet my parents that same day. Lauren called the police and claimed I'd kidnapped our daughter. The officers asked if I was the father. I said yes. They told her I had equal rights to take my child places and left. Lauren's mother then showed up at my parents' house demanding I bring the baby back immediately. She stood on the porch screaming my name, demanding I hand over her granddaughter right now. My dad kept his phone locked in place, filming every single word while my mom stayed inside with the baby tucked against her shoulder. I stood behind the screen door and explained as evenly as I could that I was the father and I had every right to bring my daughter here. Lauren's mom's face flushed as she screamed that I was a kidnapper, that I'd taken the baby, that Lauren was home having a panic attack because of what I'd done. My dad kept recording, completely silent, just capturing everything. She threatened to call her lawyer on the spot, said she'd make sure I never saw my daughter again, that Lauren would get full custody, and I'd be lucky to have supervised visits once a month. My dad zoomed in on her face as she made the threat, making sure every word was clear on video. After 20 minutes of shouting, she finally got back into her car and sped out of the driveway, almost taking out the mailbox on her way. My parents and I stood there quietly for a moment before my mom asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to answer that. I drove home 3 hours later knowing I had to sit down with Lauren and have an honest talk about our marriage, about what was going on, about whether this could be fixed. When I pulled into our driveway, every light in the house was on and I could see shadows moving past the windows. I walked through the front door and found Lauren's entire family sitting in our living room. Her dad stood up first and started yelling before I could even shut the door behind me. He called me a kidnapper, said I'd traumatized his daughter, demanded to know what kind of man takes a baby from her mother without permission. Lauren's mom jumped in, saying I was trying to steal the baby, that I was dangerous, that they should call the police again. Her brother accused me of being controlling, her sister said I was abusive, and they all talked over each other, building this wall of noise and rage. Lauren sat in the middle of the couch holding our daughter, tears streaming down her face, staring at me like I was a stranger who'd broken into her home. I tried to speak, but her dad cut me off, stepping closer and pointing a finger at my chest. Her mom pulled out her phone and started filming me, saying she wanted proof of my aggressive behavior. I stood there with my hands at my sides, not moving, not shouting back, just letting them come at me while Lauren cried and played the victim. That's when it clicked. She'd already told them her version, already turned me into the villain, already made herself the innocent mom protecting her baby from her unstable husband. Nothing I said mattered because she'd gotten to them first. I asked if we could talk alone, and Lauren shook her head, saying anything I needed to say could be said in front of her family. Her mom agreed, saying Lauren needed their support and protection. I looked at my wife holding our daughter and saw a complete stranger staring back at me. Her relatives didn't head out until well past midnight, each one stopping to warn me on the way out that they were watching me, that they'd shield Lauren and the baby no matter what happened. When the final car drove off, Lauren and I sat in icy silence in our living room, our daughter asleep between us in her bassinet. She looked straight at me and said I had a decision to make. I could apologize to her entire family for what I'd done, admit I was wrong to take the baby without her consent, and swear I'd never let my family near our daughter without her clear approval. Or I could refuse and she'd make sure I paid for it for the rest of my life. I told her I wasn't apologizing for letting my parents meet their granddaughter. She lifted the bassinet and walked into our bedroom, locking the door behind her and leaving me standing alone in the living room. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, hearing the baby cry through the walls while Lauren refused to let me in to help. By morning, Lauren's family launched their attack through every outlet they had. My phone started vibrating before 7 with messages from her mom, her siblings, her dad, all of them saying I needed to apologize and repair what I'd ruined. Lauren's mother posted online about keeping babies safe from dangerous people, keeping it vague enough that anyone reading would imagine the worst. Her friends jumped in instantly with support, asking if she was okay, offering help however they could. Her father shared articles about parental rights and custody fights, each paired with a pointed caption about fathers who try to control their families. By noon, my own family was calling me after seeing the posts, asking if everything was okay and what was actually happening. I tried to explain, but it sounded insane even to me. My wife won't let my family meet the baby, but her family comes over every day. She called the cops when I took our daughter to meet my parents. Now her whole family is attacking me online and by text. It sounded like I was the problem, like I was the one being unreasonable. Lauren refused to talk to me directly, routing everything through her mother who called every few hours with fresh ultimatums and demands. By the end of day 2, I had more than 100 messages across texts, emails and social media, all framing me as an unstable father who'd kidnapped his own child. Rachel showed up at my job during my lunch break, glancing over her shoulder as she crossed the parking lot like someone was trailing her. She had her laptop tucked under her arm and asked if we could talk somewhere private. We sat in my car and she opened a private online group chat that made my stomach drop. Lauren had been logging her plan since month 6 of her pregnancy, complete with tips from other women on how to legally shut out in-laws and secure total control over access to the baby. The text stretched back for months, revealing Lauren digging into parental rights laws in our state, asking how to frame me as unstable, and cheering every time she managed to block my family from doctor visits and hospital appointments. One woman advised Lauren to document every mistake I made, even tiny ones, to create a record of troubling behavior. Another told her to consult a lawyer before the baby arrived so she'd fully understand her rights. Lauren replied that she'd already spoken with someone and knew exactly what steps to take. Rachel kept scrolling, message after message laying out Lauren's deliberate strategy to control access to our daughter. I took a personal day from work and drove to meet Samir Carlson, the family law attorney my sister had located through her own research on parental rights. His office was downtown, in one of those buildings that felt way out of my price range, but I didn't have any real options left. Samir went through everything I brought, laying Rachel's screenshots across his desk beside the text messages, the police report from Lauren's fake kidnapping accusation, and the video my dad had recorded of Lauren's mother threatening me. He explained that I had equal parental rights no matter who gave birth, that Lauren legally couldn't stop me from taking our daughter anywhere, and that her ongoing behavior could actually hurt her in a custody case. He asked whether I wanted to try fixing the marriage or if I was ready to file for separation and custody. I told him I wasn't sure yet. I just needed to know my rights and protect my family's ability to see their granddaughter. Samir said he'd write a letter to Lauren spelling out my parental rights and her legal responsibilities, and that if she kept interfering, we could move forward with a formal custody arrangement. Somehow Lauren learned I'd met with a lawyer within hours of me leaving Samir's office. I suspect her mom had been tailing me or checking my credit card activity, because there was no other way she could have known that quickly. When I got home that night, the locks on our bedroom and the nursery had been changed. A note was taped to the door saying I could sleep in the guest room until I came to my senses. I tried the handle and found it locked, called Lauren and went straight to voicemail. Her mother picked up on the second ring when I called her, telling me she'd moved into our house to support Lauren during this hard time. She said Lauren and the baby were asleep in the nursery and that I was barred from both spaces until I apologized and accepted Lauren's rules. I asked where I was meant to stay, and she replied that the guest room was more than fine, adding that a little isolation might help me reflect on my mistakes. When I logged into our bank accounts that night, I discovered Lauren had reset every password and transferred most of our funds into accounts solely under her name. My mother contacted a professional mediator she located through our church, hoping to fix this before it turned into a full-blown legal fight. Unexpectedly, Lauren agreed to attend as long as her mother could be there. The mediation was held in a neutral office inside a building close to the courthouse. We sat at a conference table, my parents and me on one side, Lauren and her mother on the other, with a mediator at the front attempting to guide the discussion. Within 15 minutes, it was obvious this was going nowhere. Lauren's mother took over, cutting off the mediator, speaking on Lauren's behalf, and shutting down every idea before Lauren could answer. The mediator repeatedly asked her to allow Lauren to speak for herself, but Lauren only cried and kept saying I had betrayed her trust. My parents suggested compromises, offering supervised visits, brief meetups, anything Lauren needed to feel safe. Lauren's mother refused it all, insisting my family was untrustworthy and had already crossed boundaries by encouraging me to take the baby without consent. Lauren agreed with everything her mother said, never pushing back, never sharing her own opinion. Eventually, the mediator suggested a break, and when we returned, Lauren and her mother said they were done because the session was clearly pointless. 2 days after the mediation collapsed, someone came into my workplace carrying a manila envelope with my name on it. I was served legal papers in front of my coworkers. Lauren had filed for emergency custody, accusing me of kidnapping our daughter, acting unstable and threatening, and claiming she feared for the baby's safety with me. The filing included statements from her mother and 2 friends portraying me as controlling and aggressive, creating an image that wasn't true but looked awful on paper. I sent everything to Samir right away, and he called within minutes, his voice urgent and tense. He said we had to act fast, that the emergency hearing was set for just 5 days later, and that we needed to collect all evidence and get ready for court. The emergency custody hearing was held in a small courtroom with harsh fluorescent lights and stiff chairs. Lauren's attorney framed her as a scared new mom protecting her infant from an unstable father, using her claims and her mother's testimony to paint me as dangerous and unpredictable. Then Samir rose and submitted the text messages Rachel had shared, laying out Lauren's deliberate scheme to shut my family out. The judge slid on her reading glasses and reviewed Lauren's own words about crushing their spirits and forcing them to beg and grovel. She glanced up at Lauren with obvious disapproval and asked Lauren's attorney whether she knew her client had recorded plans to manipulate custody access. Lauren's face drained of color as the judge kept reading through the texts. The judge read aloud the message where Lauren mocked my grandmother being hospitalized, calling her dramatic, saying old people always used health scares for attention. Then she read the part where Lauren wrote that she hoped my grandmother would pass before the baby was old enough to remember her, so she wouldn't have to deal with visits. The courtroom fell completely silent. Lauren's lawyer tried to cut in, arguing the messages were private conversations not intended for court, but the judge raised her hand and continued reading. She went through text after text where Lauren detailed her plans to break my family's spirit, make them beg, and establish dominance from day one. When she finished, she removed her glasses and stared straight at Lauren with a look that even made Lauren's mother stop talking. The judge fully denied the emergency custody request and stated there was no evidence I posed any threat to our daughter. Then she ordered a temporary custody setup where we'd each have the baby for 3 days at a time until a full hearing could take place. Lauren immediately began crying, loud sobs bouncing off the small courtroom walls, but the judge wasn't finished. She ordered that we both attend family counseling twice a week with a therapist she would assign, and she warned Lauren clearly that the documented statements about intentionally excluding my family could qualify as parental alienation if the behavior continued. Lauren's mother stood up and started arguing with the judge, claiming new mothers needed protection and support, not punishment, and asking if the court understood how fragile Lauren was after giving birth. The judge told her to sit down or be removed from the courtroom. Lauren's lawyer pulled her mother back into her chair while Lauren kept crying, and I noticed Samir beside me taking notes on everything unfolding. The judge scheduled the full custody hearing for 6 weeks later and told us both to follow the 3-day schedule exactly, no exceptions, no flexibility without court approval. We exited through separate doors, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, just trying to process what had happened. 3 days later, I drove to an office building downtown for our first required counseling session with Helen Gentry. The waiting area had stiff chairs and dated magazines, and Lauren was already there with her mom beside her, fingers wrapped around her hand. Helen called us into her office, a cramped space with 2 sofas facing each other and a chair where she sat holding a notepad. Lauren's mother tried to come in with us, but Helen stopped her at the doorway, explaining this was for parents only. The meeting began with Helen asking each of us to explain why we were there, and Lauren instantly broke down, talking through tears about how brutal labor was, how overwhelmed she felt, how no one really understands what new mothers deal with. She went on for nearly 20 minutes about the delivery, the sleepless nights, and how terrifying it is to be responsible for such a tiny human. Helen listened quietly, nodding now and then, jotting things down. Then she asked Lauren directly about the text messages outlining her plan to shut my family out, and Lauren's entire tone shifted. She stopped crying and said the texts were misunderstood, that she was just venting to friends like all new moms do, that people say things they don't mean when they're stressed. Helen asked what context would make wishing someone's grandmother dead acceptable, and Lauren flushed red. She accused Helen of being anti-mother, said therapists were supposed to be supportive, claimed she was twisting Lauren's words to make her look awful. Helen stayed composed and said she was only reading what Lauren had written herself. Lauren folded her arms and refused to speak for the rest of the session, and Helen noted that in her file. 2 days later while I was at work, my phone rang and Rachel's name lit up the screen. She spoke fast, voice trembling, saying I had to hear what had just happened. Lauren's mother had shown up at Rachel's apartment that morning with $2,000 in cash laid out across Rachel's kitchen table. She begged Rachel to tell the court she'd invented the texts, or that I'd somehow pressure her into handing them over, or that she'd misunderstood what Lauren meant. Rachel started recording on her phone the second she realized what was going on and caught everything. Her mother's voice on the recording sounded frantic, first offering the money, then threatening to cut Rachel off financially if she didn't help Lauren. She warned the whole family would turn on Rachel, that she'd be blamed for ruining Lauren's life, that she'd never be welcome at family gatherings again. Rachel told her mother no, that she wouldn't lie in court, and her mother left the cash behind and walked out. Rachel sent me the recording while we were still talking, and I could hear her crying as she said she was done shielding Lauren from the fallout of her own choices. She said giving up her bond with their mother was worth it if it meant doing what was right, but her voice cracked as she said it. The first day of my 3-day custody window under the court order felt like Christmas morning when I was a kid. I picked up our daughter from Lauren's mom's house where they had been staying, and Lauren passed her over without meeting my eyes. I drove straight to my grandmother's house, where she was healing at home after her surgery. My entire family was already there waiting, and when I walked in holding the baby, my grandmother began to cry. She held her great-granddaughter for the first time, touching her tiny fingers, studying her face like she was memorizing every detail. My mother snapped photos of 4 generations together, my grandmother in her recliner holding the baby, my mother standing behind her, me beside them. My sister finally got to hold her niece, sitting on the couch and just staring at her for long minutes without saying a word. My father sat quietly in his chair with the baby asleep on his chest, and I watched his face soften in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. No one tried to do too much or overstimulate the baby. We just sat together in my grandmother's living room, passing her around gently, letting everyone have their moment. My mother made lunch and we ate while the baby slept, and for a few hours everything felt normal and right. My grandmother told me before I left that she'd been praying for this moment, that she hadn't been sure she'd live to see it, and I had to turn away so she wouldn't see me cry. The 3 days with my family went by too fast, and Sunday evening came when I was supposed to return the baby to Lauren. I drove to our house at the agreed time, 6 o'clock, but Lauren's car wasn't in the driveway. I called her phone and it went straight to voicemail. I texted her asking where she was and got no reply. I sat in my car with the baby in her car seat behind me, waiting, checking my phone every few minutes. 7 o'clock passed, then 8 o'clock. Finally at 8:15, Lauren's mother texted me saying Lauren wasn't ready to take the baby back yet, and I needed to be more flexible with the schedule. I took screenshots of everything with timestamps, the missed calls, the texts, the time showing on my phone. Then I called Samir and he picked up on the second ring. He told me to contact the police non-emergency line to report a custody order violation, that I needed to document this officially. I made the call while sitting in my driveway, and the dispatcher said they'd send officers to Lauren's location. About 30 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived at the house. I had driven over and was standing outside when they pulled up, and they went to the door while I stayed on the sidewalk holding the baby. Lauren's mother opened the door and instantly launched into a speech about how mothers have more rights than fathers, how the schedule was unrealistic, how Lauren needed extra time. One of the officers, a woman, stopped her mid-rant. She explained plainly that the custody order was a court order, not a flexible guideline, and that Lauren was required to follow it immediately. Lauren's mother pushed back, claiming the court didn't understand what new mothers need, and the officer warned her that continuing to break the order could lead to contempt of court charges. Lauren eventually came to the door, her eyes swollen from crying, and the officer asked if she was refusing to exchange custody at the court-ordered time. Lauren reached out for the baby, I handed her over, and she began sobbing theatrically while holding her. The officers recorded everything in their report, noting the time, the delay, and Lauren's mother's comments. They told both of us that the next exchange had to happen on time or there would be legal consequences, then they left. Our next counseling session took place 3 days later, and Helen opened by saying she'd reviewed her notes from the first session and had some recommendations. She looked directly at Lauren and said she was recommending individual therapy to address what she had identified as control issues rooted in past relationship trauma. Lauren's face drained of color and she tried to cut in, but Helen continued. She said she'd observed troubling patterns in how Lauren was using the baby as leverage against my family, and that while her feelings about her ex's mother were understandable, she was now punishing people who had nothing to do with that situation. She explained that Lauren was using our daughter to work through unresolved emotional conflicts from an entirely different relationship, and that this wasn't healthy for anyone involved. Lauren stood up and said Helen didn't understand anything, that she was supposed to be helping but was only making things worse. Helen stayed composed and said she was trying to help Lauren recognize her behavior patterns before they permanently damaged her relationship with her daughter. Lauren grabbed her purse and stormed out halfway through the session, leaving me sitting there alone with Helen. Helen wrote something in her notes and said she would be including this in her report to the court. Over the next 2 weeks, I began to see fractures forming in Lauren's family support system. Rachel fully took my side and moved out of her parents' house into an apartment with a roommate. Then Ethan, Lauren's younger brother, started messaging me privately, saying he thought his sister had crossed a line. He said he tried to talk to Lauren about compromise and she'd screamed at him that he was betraying her, that everyone was against her, that she was the victim in all of this. Ethan said their dad was worn down by all the conflict and only wanted Lauren to agree to a fair custody plan so everyone could finally move forward. Lauren's mom was finding herself more and more alone in backing Lauren's hardline stance. Even some of Lauren's friends had gone quiet on her social media, and the few who still replied were gently telling her to think about therapy or mediation. Ethan sent me screenshots from the family group chat where their dad wrote that Lauren needed to face reality and stop fighting a fight she had already lost. Lauren replied by exiting the group chat completely. My phone vibrated with a message from Lauren asking if we could meet just the two of us, no lawyers, no relatives. We decided on a parking lot near our place, neutral ground where neither of us would feel cornered. I arrived early and waited in my car, and when she parked next to me she looked drained. We both stepped out and then sat in her car because it was raining, and for a few minutes we didn't say a word. Then Lauren began to talk, her voice low and unsteady. She said she'd been afraid ever since she got pregnant that she'd lose control like she had with Michael's mother, that watching my family's excitement had brought back all those old feelings of being overwhelmed and helpless. She admitted Michael's mother had taken over everything, the wedding plans, their day-to-day life, and it had felt suffocating. When they split up she promised herself she'd never allow that again, but now she saw she'd swung too far the other way. I told her I understood being shaped by past hurt, that I understood why she was scared, but our daughter deserved relationships with both families. I said I couldn't stay married to someone who would use our child as a weapon to hurt people I cared about, that I couldn't stand by while she punished my family for what Michael's mother had done. We both cried there in her car as the rain tapped the windshield. Lauren said she wasn't sure she could change enough to save the marriage, and I said I wasn't sure either. 6 weeks after the emergency hearing, we returned to court for the full custody trial. This time both sides came prepared with complete cases, evidence, witness statements, and professional input. Lauren's attorney went first, centering her argument on bonding, breastfeeding, and maternal instinct. Then Samir presented our side, including the new recording of Lauren's mother trying to bribe Rachel, the police report from the custody violation, and Wilhelmina's detailed notes about Lauren leaving therapy. Wilhelmina's written evaluation recommended equal custody with structured exchanges, acknowledged Lauren's progress in starting to recognize her control issues, but also recorded her ongoing resistance to letting my family have unsupervised time with the baby. The judge went over every detail with care, moving slowly, asking pointed questions about particular moments and how the timeline lined up. After that, she set a permanent custody plan where we would each have the baby on alternating weeks, and both sides of the family could visit during their time without needing approval from the other parent. Lauren broke down crying again but didn't fight it, and her attorney said they would follow the ruling. I began attending my own therapy sessions every Tuesday night, and Lauren went to hers on Thursday afternoons with a separate therapist the court had cleared. Wilhelmina continued working with us one-on-one, checking how we were managing the custody setup and whether we were actually addressing the issues that led us to court. Around 6 weeks into the new routine, Wilhelmina called me after a session with Lauren and asked if we could grab coffee to discuss something unofficially. We met in a quiet corner of a cafe near her office, and she explained that Lauren was finally doing real work on her trauma instead of just blaming everyone else for what went wrong. She said Lauren had spent weeks deflecting and justifying herself, but something had recently shifted, and she was beginning to see how she'd recreated the same control dynamic she'd always hated, only this time she was the one holding all the power. Wilhelmina couldn't share specifics because of confidentiality, but she wanted me to know Lauren was making real progress and might truly be able to become a good co-parent one day. I thanked her for telling me, even though it didn't change that our marriage was likely finished. 3 days later, Lauren called me during her custody week around 8 that night. I almost ignored it since we usually only texted about drop-offs and baby items, but something pushed me to answer. Her voice sounded different, softer and less guarded than it had in months. She apologized for everything, genuinely apologized without excuses or blaming anyone else, and said her therapist was helping her understand how she'd used our daughter as a weapon against my family because she was terrified of losing control again. She told me about Michael's mother taking over their wedding plans, deciding everything from the flowers to the menu to the guest list without caring what Lauren wanted. She said it felt suffocating, like she was just a prop in someone else's celebration, and when that engagement ended, she swore she would never feel that powerless again. Then she got pregnant and saw my mother's excitement, and it brought all those feelings back, and instead of talking to me, she built an entire plan to make sure my family knew they had zero control over our baby. She told me she finally saw that she'd swung too far the other way, that she'd turned into the controlling person she always despised, and that she regretted what she'd put my grandmother, my sister, and my parents through. It didn't save our marriage, and we both understood that, but it was the first time she truly owned her behavior instead of defending it. 2 weeks later, both families met together in Wilhelmina's office for a mediation appointment to set firm boundaries and a visitation plan, now that the custody agreement was finalized. Lauren's mom arrived looking stiff and irritated, while my parents walked in careful but cautiously optimistic. Wilhelmina opened by saying we had to build guidelines that worked for everyone and that compromise would be required on both sides. Lauren's mother immediately argued that she should be allowed to come by whenever she wanted during Lauren's custody weeks because she was the maternal grandmother and shared a special bond with the baby. Wilhelmina calmly redirected her and said, that's exactly the kind of thinking that had caused problems, and that both grandparents mattered equally in the baby's life. We spent 2 hours hashing out a plan where both sides of the family could visit during their respective custody weeks, but everyone had to call ahead and respect it if we said it wasn't a good time. Lauren's mother had the hardest time accepting boundaries, insisting she'd been involved since day one and shouldn't be treated the same as my parents who'd been shut out. But Lauren surprised me by supporting the limits we were setting, telling her mother she could visit during Lauren's weeks, but needed to and couldn't just show up anymore. My parents accepted the same rules without pushing back, and we set up a shared calendar on our phones so everyone knew the schedule and there wouldn't be confusion about who had the baby and when. During my custody weeks, my family fell into an easy rhythm where my parents came over for dinner twice a week, usually Tuesday and Friday evenings. My sister began video calling from across the country every Sunday morning to see the baby and check in with me about how things were going. My grandmother came by every Sunday afternoon, sitting in my living room holding her great-granddaughter and sharing stories about my father when he was young. The baby was doing great with steady time from both families, and I could tell she was starting to recognize people and react to familiar faces. She smiled when my mom picked her up and grabbed for my dad's glasses, and she'd grown used to my grandmother's gentle voice during those Sunday visits. One night while we were cleaning up after dinner, my mother told me she was thankful we'd fought for this, even if it meant losing our marriage. Because our daughter would grow up knowing she was loved by everyone, not just one side of her family. Half a year after that awful moment when I first brought our baby to see my parents, I was settled into my own apartment about 15 minutes away from the house we used to share. Lauren and I had figured out a workable co-parenting setup that honestly felt healthier than the final stretch of our marriage, mostly because we'd stopped pretending to be spouses and could focus only on raising our daughter. We traded custody every Sunday night at 6, meeting in the parking lot of a park located halfway between our homes. Those exchanges were usually fast and calm, just brief notes about feeding times, sleep, and anything that needed to be refilled. Each side of the family had normal access during their assigned weeks, and no one had to ask permission anymore, since the court order had settled that for good. Lauren had even called my grandmother herself one afternoon to apologize for the cruel things she'd said while my grandmother was hospitalized. My grandmother cried and forgave her right away, because that was simply who she was. Our daughter would be raised in 2 homes instead of 1, spending half her life with me and my family and the other half with Lauren and hers. It wasn't the future I pictured when we got married and talked about kids, but she would grow up knowing both sides loved her and wanted her in their lives. Sometimes that's the best result you can get when grown-up mistakes can't be undone and a marriage is too damaged to fix, but you can still create something stable for your child. I was sad our marriage didn't last, sad my daughter would grow up moving between 2 houses instead of having both parents under one roof. But I was proud I stood up for my family's right to know their granddaughter, proud I didn't fold when Lauren tried to use our baby as leverage, and I'd make that same decision again even knowing it would cost me my marriage.